Hey guys, this is Tommy from the Ravens Creek Study, and today we are finishing our series on what is Bible or Biblical Theology 101. So essentially we've kind of traced the eternal covenant through the Old Testament. When we come to the New Testament, by the way, eternal covenant and new covenant, kind of the same, kind of the same term, just synonyms. When we come to the New Testament with New Covenant, I've been trying to look at, okay, so why is this new? What's going on here that helps us to understand what's happening in the New Testament based upon all that we have already previously looked at in the Old Testament. When we come to the New Testament eschatology, this is the end times. This would be the last days teaching. So texts like Matthew 24 come to mind. 2 Thessalonians is a big one. The book of Revelation. When we come to these books, we need to understand, or these passages, we need to understand that what is being spoken of stems directly from what was already expected in the prophetic Old Testament. There's both the books of the prophets, and there's an entire history that we need to comprehend. There's an expectation, there's a prophetic expectation for the end of the age. All of the Bible seems to be looking upon the day when these events would take place, and at the end, and at the summit of all these events, at the consummation of the age, there would be the return of the Messiah, and there would be the establishment of peace on the whole over the whole world. The kingdoms of darkness would be taken down, the principalities and powers removed, and all the people of the earth would come to a place where they are now worshiping the God of Israel, coming up to Jerusalem, sacrificing at the Feast of Tabernacles. Whether that's literal animal sacrifice or not can be debated, but there is that mentioned. What I want to look at here is just some of what the Old Testament expects and where we can find that in the New Testament. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up my Bible here. I should have taken these texts and put them up on the screen so that you could see them. 1 Peter 4:17, "For the time has come for judgment to begin at the house of God, and if it begins with us first, what will be the end of those who do not obey the gospel of God?" Now, what Peter is referencing here, we think this is just some sort of an independent statement. First of all, there's a context to the statement that if you read the context of 1 Peter 3 and 4, you'll begin to realize what Peter is referencing is persecution. He's talking to these saints about how they're being persecuted and how God is not going to just leave this persecution high and dry and forget about it, but that there is a purpose, there is something that God is doing in this. And so judgment begins at the household of God. Well, how is it that persecution is judgment at the household of God? Go back to Ezekiel chapter 9. Where's verse 6? Here God says to these angels that are gathered at the house of God, at the temple in Jerusalem, "Utterly slay old and young men, maidens and little children and women. Do not come near anyone on whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary." So they began with the elders who were before the temple. Now here's something that you need to understand. The mark, earlier in this chapter, might have even been at the end of chapter 8, I don't remember. It's been a while since I've read this passage. There's a set of angels, and one of them has a pen, and he goes through and he marks on the forehead all of these people who are not going to receive the judgment. This is paralleled to Revelation chapter 7 with the sealing of the 144,000. All of these verses kind of connect together. And so these other angels who have swords instead of the pen, they go through and they start just cutting down and slaying all of the people who don't have a mark on their forehead. What Peter is doing is he's looking back upon that and he's saying, we have been receiving persecution, but there's coming a time when judgment will begin at the house of God, it has already come even, so that God is going to slay those who don't have the mark. Who is those who don't have the mark? It's those who are unrighteous, who are wicked, starting with the elders, those who are practicing the abominations that God is grieved over. We see in Romans 2:9, excuse me, the judgments that are supposed to come to those who do error. It starts to the Jew first. Why? Because the Jew's not been cast off. They're still the people of God, and so God still holds Israel, ethnic Israel, to a moral standard. But because they are not fulfilling that moral standard, to the Jew first, and then to the Greek. That's not a statement of we've replaced them. That's a statement saying, you and I, who are now a part of Israel, to us first. Judgment comes upon us first, and then God judges the nations. And this is what the prophets have also declared. The time of tribulation. This is not the time where the nations are being judged. This is when the nations, the heathen, are persecuting the people of God, quite terribly even. And the judgment of God comes with the coming of the Lamb, with Jesus' return. That's when the wrath is poured out upon the nations, and vindication comes upon the Jew and upon Israel, which we have been grafted into. This is why in Revelation 6, the fifth seal, the martyrs are under the altar crying out, how long until you avenge our blood? Well, I thought that God was already avenging their blood because the whole of the tribulation is wrath. Well, if the whole tribulation is wrath, then why is it that wrath has not yet started all the way into on the fifth seal? You get what I'm saying here? In Acts chapter 2, these are Peter's sermons. Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 3 here. When you read this, the statements that Peter is making, he is specifically establishing that there's an end time contingency. Why is it that in chapter 3 he tells the people, come out and separate from this wicked generation? Is this a statement of you generation that is what's the generation, the Pharisees, that this 20-year period or whatever it is, that those whom Jesus was talking to, they're the ones who are going to receive judgment? No. The Greek word, this Greek word geneos, it often is not a word associated with a time period, but both in the Old Testament Greek translation, the Septuagint, that was around during the time of Jesus, and in the New Testament, a lot of times the word there, generation, translated as generation, is actually a statement of a disposition of heart. There's the righteous generation who have been around since righteous Abel and onward, and there's the wicked generation that's been around since Cain and onward. And that's why Jesus is able to stand before the Pharisees and says, you wicked generation, you're going to have to answer to all of the righteous blood spilt from Abel on to Zechariah. Well, why are they getting blamed for things that they weren't even alive to have to deal with? The answer is, the word generation doesn't mean a 20-year period of time. It's a people who all have the same wickedness as Cain had. So these kinds of statements of judgment upon Israel until the restoration of all things, these are statements that we need to understand have the prophetic expectancy. They have the ties to the Old Testament. And I guess I went through Matthew 23:36 through 24, 1 through 3 with this generation idea. What about Israel being sifted through the nations? You have in Revelation, let me flip there, Revelation 11:2, this is where it talks about Jerusalem being trodden under by the Gentiles. I'll just read the verse so you know what I'm quoting. But leave out... Okay, let me read from verse 1. Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood saying, rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. This stems directly back to what Jesus had said in Luke chapter 21, that the times of the Gentiles would take place until a certain point in time. There is an until there. So Jerusalem will not always be given over to the Gentiles. And in fact, here in Revelation, it says that Jerusalem would only be given to the Gentiles for 42 months. So those who would teach Luke 21 is specific upon the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. I don't think that you can exegetically say that unless you say that Revelation 11 took place in AD 70 as well. The problem with that, well, I think there's a lot of problems with that, but for the case of this study, and not getting in too deep and too over your head, especially since I don't have all the text up here on the screen for you to see, I'm just going to go ahead and say I think there are severe problems with that. Essentially, here at the very end of the age, in Revelation 11, the very city itself, Jerusalem, has been given to the Antichrist. How do I know that? Because there are these two witnesses that, if you keep reading in the next verse, there are these two witnesses that prophesy for that 42-month period. And they're killed by the beast who comes out from the abyss. Who's the beast that comes out from the abyss? That's defined to us in Revelation 13 with this Antichrist figure who comes out of the waters, out of the sea. And then there's also the false prophet who establishes the abomination of desolation, that dragon statue dedicated to the beast. And we have again this statement of the beast who come out of the sea. We have this in Revelation 14 and Revelation 17 as well. When you get to Revelation 12, you find in Revelation 12 this woman who represents Israel, because you can compare her description given in verse 1 with Genesis chapter 37 verse 9, or is it 39 verse 7? Let me look that up now that I'm questioning myself there. Genesis 37 verse 9. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream. This time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." In verse 10, so he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" So they knew this dream, these stars are representative of the other 11 brothers of Joseph, so the 12 tribes of Israel, and the sun and the moon represent Jacob and Rachel. How is it then that when you come to Revelation 12 verse 1 that people want to say, "Oh no, this is the church," or "This is tribulation saints," or "This is whatever"? No, this has to be Israel, because it's the exact same language. This woman who's clothed with the sun and who stands upon the moon, and her head has a garland with 12 stars in it. It's the exact same. It's the exact same imagery here. And this woman, after she bears the male child, after she gives birth to the son, the dragon chases her into the wilderness for a time, times, and half a time, according to what's said later, which is an exact draw from Daniel, Daniel chapter 12 specifically, but it's that 42-month period, the 1,260 days that she's taken care of in verse 6. You have Israel sifted through the nations. You have in Romans 9:25, once again, let me see if I can flip there. This is making it take a little longer, and I do apologize for that. 9:25 through 29, we read, "As God says also in Hosea, I will call them my people who were not my people, and her beloved who is not my beloved. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there they shall be called the sons of the living God." Isaiah also cries out concerning Israel, "Though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea," let me go ahead and let's see. Though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, the remnant will be saved. For he will finish the work and cut it short in righteousness, because the Lord will make a short work upon the earth. And Isaiah, as Isaiah said before, unless the Lord of Sabaoth, or hosts, had left us a seed, we would have become like Sodom, and we would have been made like Gomorrah. Here's what Paul is doing. He's going back and he's quoting these Old Testament texts. That when you go back and you look at the context of those texts, you realize he's talking about Israel. Who is it that I will call them my people who were not my people, and her beloved who was not beloved? Who is that? Well, in Hosea, when you look at the context, that's Israel. So this is talking about how God will judge Israel and no longer call them my people, but they shall not always be not my people, for he shall once again wed them, just as Hosea had to go to the prostitute and continue to go back to her, even though she's deciding she doesn't want to be Hosea's, even though Gomer continues to say, no, this isn't what I want to be. I don't want to be a wife. And he continues to go back to her. Why? Because this is what God is doing with Israel. So these texts here, and these are only 3 of them, but these texts here, these are specifically showing us New Testament places that we do find the Old Testament prophetic understanding, comprehension. We see Israel being redeemed and returning to the land. And I've given you a list here, Romans 11:25 and 26. When the fullness of the Gentiles come in, then all Israel will be saved. Well, is that ethnic Israel or national Israel? Or is that ethnic Israel or, quote, spiritual Israel? Well, the people in Romans 11:25, let me see if I can find the verse real quick. For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Has blindness in part happened to spiritual Israel? If it's happened to ethnic Israel, and that's the whole point of the argument here, then verse 26, all Israel shall be saved, must also be to the same people who have received blindness in part. This is redemption of ethnic Israel. Ephesians 1. Oh man, Ephesians is probably my favorite place actually, because this is so misunderstood so often. Ephesians 1, verses 13 and 14. In him, Christ, you also trusted after you heard the word of truth, the gospel of your salvation, in whom also, having believed, you were sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise, who is the guarantee of our inheritance until the redemption of the purchased possession to the praise of his glory. 2 questions. The Holy Spirit is the seal, and he is the guarantee of our inheritance. What is our inheritance? And number 2, until the redemption of the purchased possession. What is the purchased possession? The purchased possession is Israel, ethnic Israel. When ethnic Israel is redeemed, according to all of the prophets in the Old Testament, when ethnic Israel is redeemed, they come back to the land and they receive their inheritance. Not like in the days of Joshua where it was contingent upon their obedience, but now a more full inheritance where they inherit both the land and the eternal rest with it, so that they may eternally be there and they may eternally be God's people and he shall be their God. They will no longer be in disobedience. And so these 2 things, what's our inheritance? Our inheritance is to inherit with Israel when they're redeemed. That's the whole point. And you flip over to chapter 3. For this reason, I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ Jesus for you Gentiles, if indeed you have heard of the dispensation of grace of God, which was given to me for you, how that by revelation he made known to me the mystery, as I have briefly written you already, by which, when you read, you may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Christ, which in other ages was not made known to the sons of men, it has now been revealed by the Spirit to his holy apostles and prophets, that the Gentiles should be fellow heirs of the same body and partakers of his promise in Christ through the gospel. What is he saying? It connects right back to what I just said, that the Gentiles are also being grafted in so that they might also receive an inheritance when the purchased possession is redeemed. we have this redemption of Israel and the return to the land in Revelation 20 4 through 6, and then I give you some more verses here to relate that to, and to see how you can also see all of this connecting together. When we look at David ruling over Israel, one only needs to think of the book of Acts, the great sermon that Peter gives in Acts chapter 2, and he talks about how David died and went into the grave, but this Jesus yet still lives as the son of David. Think of all of the places where Paul calls Jesus the son of David, and even in the book of Revelation, you have in Revelation 5:5, he's called the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the seed of David. The nations in the millennium. How is it that we can expect nations in the millennium? Well, you see in Revelation 20, verses 7 and 8. Let's see if I can flip there a little more quickly. Now when the 1,000 years, this is the millennium, the word millennium means 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison, and he will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth. Now, how is it that Satan goes and deceives the nations if they're not in existence at this point? If there aren't any nations in the millennial reign of Christ, in that 1,000-year rule of Jesus over the earth, then how can Satan deceive the nations at that point? The only way you can say this is if you take a post-millennial view to say that the nations are not present there, to take a post-millennial view that we are currently in the millennium and Jesus returns at the end of the millennium, which is not what the book of Revelations chapters 18 through 21 suggest at all, actually. Or you say there is no millennium, which once again, if you just read Revelation 18 through 20, or even through 22, you'll find the whole sweep here. To claim there either is no millennium or that Jesus returns after the 1,000 years, to claim that, you have to find your source outside of the book of Revelation. Your arguments have to come from other places. It's a poor exegesis of the book of Revelation. Now, is that to say Jesus returns before the millennium and he establishes 1,000 years where he reigns on the earth, and then the nations come up at that time to Jerusalem, and at the end of it, Satan is loosed and he deceives the nations? Is that to say that there are not problems with that view? Well, no, of course there are difficulties. Every position has difficulties, but that's not the point. The point is, what does the text explicitly say? What does the proper exegesis of the text suggest? And if you're standing by what the proper exegesis would suggest, then it doesn't matter what difficulties there might be. You see what I mean? We stand by the text and we say, yeah, but we can work through these difficulties. We just need to make sure we're faithful to what the text is actually saying. So, how do we know that there are going to be nations in the millennium? Even Revelation 20 suggests that. 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 8. You know, instead of reading this, I'm going to go ahead. What in the world? Instead of reading this right now, I'm going to go ahead and, excuse me, and leave it for now. In 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 8, this is Paul telling the Thessalonians, don't be afraid. Don't think that Jesus has already returned. We know that time will not come until these things first happen. And then he goes through this dissertation of what the end of the age should be and what we can expect at the end of the age. And the two things that he mentions specifically, that these two things have to happen, is one, the man of sin has to be revealed. And that man of sin is the same one who shall sit in the temple declaring himself to be God. And this is the same man of sin that Jesus shall come and destroy miraculously with the brightness of his coming. The other thing is, quote, rebellion. I have it in quotes because most translations don't translate the word as rebellion. The Greek word means rebellion. If you go back to Daniel chapter 8, verses 10 through 12, the idea of the sanctuary being given over to this Antichrist figure, it happens because of treachery or because of rebellion. This what you're probably familiar with is the great falling away. That's what most people know of this verse. The man of sin to be revealed in the great falling away. The difficulty here is that the word means rebellion. Is that a great falling away? Of course. But you need to understand the original context of the word. There's a rebellion. There's something that takes place. There's a rebellion that causes for the man of sin to have access to the temple to declare himself as God. And that's the whole point of Daniel chapter 8, verses 10 through 12 there. How is it that this little horn, this Antichrist figure, is able to rise up and to battle the Prince of Princes? How is it that he's even able to trample the sanctuary? How does he even trample the sanctuary? It's because of rebellion, because of treachery. Somebody's given this place to him. Someone who shouldn't have. Someone who had access to this place. Do you see how the pieces are kind of coming together for that piece? Okay, Revelation 12. We went through this a little bit. The woman is Israel, the serpent is Satan. Once again, I'm not going to give you the whole, I'm not going to read the whole chapter to you here. There's this woman that I already read this description to you. It's Israel. Then there's also this serpent who wants to devour the male child that she's pregnant with. The serpent is Satan. That's defined later in the chapter. In verse 5 and 6, she gives birth to the male child, and the male child is caught up unto God, and the serpent doesn't get to have the male child. The woman is sifted into the wilderness. At the very end, excuse me, I guess we can even stay with verse 6. In verse 6, it says, they shall provide for her, or they shall nourish her for 1,260 days. Once again, this goes back to the Greek of the passage. The Greek is that they shall take care of her, not that she shall be provided for. Later in verses 13 and onward, you see this same situation being rediscussed. It's the serpent pursuing the woman. After he's been cast down to the earth, he pursues the woman, and he, excuse me, so the male child goes up, Satan comes down, he pursues the woman into the wilderness, he spews a flood after her, and the earth opens up, and the flood falls into the earth. This very much is probably symbolic language, but there's a lot that you can still connect it to the Old Testament and see there's an end times flood that the prophets declared of. Even Daniel saying the end shall come like a flood. There's a lot of that language. The earth opens up to her. I think the earth opening up is the church. Why? Because the next verse, or the what happens after this, after the woman is taken care of and the earth has swallowed up and the serpent sees that she is taken care of, he then turns his attention and starts to persecute Christians. So that's my reasoning there. That's the whole of the chapter there. When you look at Revelation 13, so we go from Revelation 12 right into Revelation 13. The beast, at the very beginning here, is the man of sin, which is the Antichrist. This is the little horn of Daniel chapter 7 and chapter 8. This is the vile prince of Daniel chapter 11. Now this man of sin, I guess the vile prince might actually be Daniel 9, and you then see him in Daniel 11, verse 21 and onward. This beast persecutes the saints. He establishes the false prophet establishes the abomination of desolation. You see that in verses, 14 through 16. And like I said, if the false prophet's the one who establishes the abomination of desolation, there must also be that false prophet that arises out of the earth instead of out of the sea. Revelation 17. I'm just giving you a really big summary here. Revelation 17, the beast, once again, man of sin, Antichrist. The woman, this is adulterous Israel. You can go back and read texts like Ezekiel 16. This is a prophecy against Israel, I think even specifically Jerusalem, but it's a prophecy against Israel and how she saw Sodom be destroyed, and she saw her sister Israel, the northern Israel, be taken away by Assyria, and she saw that they were judged by their sin, and yet she continues to persist in her sin, so therefore God is going to do these things to her. And I even have, you can see the woman is devoured here, and compare Ezekiel 16, that latter part, somewhere around verse 60 and onward, you see the you can see how that judgment sounds a lot like the judgment of Revelation 17, that the woman is devoured, and you can see Micah 3, 1 through 3, Daniel 7, 7, etc. There's a lot of verses. I didn't look them all up, so I kind of got lazy, to be honest. But there's a lot of this that's traced back to the end time, or to the Old Testament. And truly, when you read the book of Revelation, everything stems from the Old Testament. Even like in Revelation 9, the locusts. Compare the description of these locusts and what they're doing to Joel chapter 1 and 2. If what John is seeing, he's connecting back to Joel chapter 1 and 2. That's the destruction of Jerusalem. And of course, the army in Revelation, John is saying the army goes out beyond just Jerusalem. But I mean that's that's the way we do good exegesis. Is we look at these symbols, we say, well, is there anywhere else? Is there anything that John might be quoting here? Is there anything that he's alluding to? Is there anything here in the way he's wording it? He's chosen these words specifically to connect us back so that we can have a better understanding of what he's seeing and what he's trying to convey to us. I know it's a vision, and it's not John making it up on the fly. But John had the vision, and he apparently obviously had the interpretation, and he's trying to use these, the way that he's describing the vision, he's obviously trying to connect it back for us. It would be foolish of us to not at least try to connect it back with him. For us to just say, no, it's New Testament, it doesn't really connect back. That's foolish to me. So 1 Corinthians 15. The same moment that Jesus hands the kingdom over to God, the Father, is the moment that Paul is expressing as our resurrection and the swallowing up of death. This is not literal. If this is not literal physical resurrection at the second coming of Jesus, then the whole text is neutered of meaning. So, I mean, once again, you're seeing sifting of Israel, judgment of Israel, the church being there to take her in her time of need, because this is what he's established us for, that we would drive the Jew to jealousy, and that he would not utterly destroy her. But when she goes to the wilderness, as Jeremiah 31 verse 2 says, the people who survive the sword shall find favor in the wilderness. This is the same Israel. This is declared through all of the prophets, that she's taken into the wilderness of the nations and she's provided for there. You see the return of Jesus quite obviously in the New Testament. So I didn't go into that one. You see here the resurrection of the dead, and then this is once again prominent. It's over and over through the New Testament. I just picked the classic one text that so many always quote, is 1 Corinthians 15 with the resurrection. So in conclusion, to summarize the Bible then, we find that the most elementary things being taught is that they who are the saints have been brought into the eternal reality of Revelation 21 and 22, that new heaven and new earth, the new Jerusalem. That reality is an eternal and heavenly perception at our current time. It has always existed. But one day it shall be manifest upon the earth. It's no longer that heavenly Jerusalem, but shall one day be the earthly and heavenly together. There should be a marriage that takes place there. Everything the Bible teaches points to that event and the significance of that event. With the significance understood, we live there now. And so that's my conclusion for the whole of the series. I want to take a moment though to encourage you. I'm going to be going into a more thorough biblical theology, especially this New Testament part. I've really skimmed the surface. I have not gone into very many texts. In the texts that I have gone into, I barely touched on. But the same is true for the Old Testament. There's a lot that I just blatantly left out. I think I left out pretty much the entire period of the book of Judges. So I would encourage you. When to listen. I'm going to do a series. This is what I'm trying to get at. I'm going to do a series on biblical theology that's going to be much more thorough. And in fact, I'm already working on part 1 of the series. So Biblical Theology 1 which is going to be another overview, but it's going to be different teaching than what I've done here. It's going to be setting up the framework so that when we get into Biblical Theology 2, which would be going through the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses, when we get into that, we can just simply go through it and not have to establish all of the foundational, here's the underlying precepts and concepts that this is going to be leading into. We'll be able to just simply know, here's what the whole of the Bible teaches, and when we look at just the Torah, here's how this fits into the whole of the Bible. When we look at just the historical books of Joshua through, I think, Esther, I'm not sure where I'm going with that one, but probably Joshua through Esther, or maybe Joshua through 1st and 2nd Samuel, I don't know. But when we get there, we'll be able to look at those sets of books and just say, here's how we understand these books in the context of the whole, and we'll be able to go through it much more thoroughly and see how each story plays into that, and how each story can give us that overarching understanding that then builds upon one another, so that by the time we come to the New Testament, we're able to look through all of these books more significantly and wrestle with them. And probably the very last book, or the last teaching, would be going through the book of Revelation. It is probably going to be like Biblical Theology 10 or 12 by the time I get there. But anyway, for those of you who are interested, who have gone through this series, and you want to know a little bit more deeply about biblical theology, I prefer this way of teaching than what most biblical theology courses do. Most of the time, it's more of the here's what we, how do I want to word it? Most of the time, biblical theology is more like debating of the author of the book, debating of the time of the book, debating of various patterns that we find in the book, like if a certain phrase is repeated, what's the significance of this phrase to that author? And these are the sorts of questions that a lot of biblical theologians wrestle with. I don't find that to be as necessary as just simply tapping into the book itself and asking the question of, what is the book establishing and how does it relate to the whole of the Bible? How does it open up the whole of the Bible for us? I think that's much more necessary, especially in our day and age, when we don't have very many teachers who do that. So for those of you who are interested, keep an eye out for that. Until next time, I thank you for listening. This one's probably a long video, but I thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Grace and peace to you in Christ.